All right, happy National Women's History Month. Lenox Parker, this is Crystal Jordan, your editor-in-chief, and we have been celebrating women the entire month of March. We are still in a celebration phase, but it's important that we have conversations that include women in their totality. So not just do we need to celebrate, but we also need to educate, and we also need to talk about some important situations that continue to happen specifically to our community. Dating and relationship safety remain growing concerns on college campuses. According to the National Institute of Justice and the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, 1 in 5 women experience sexual assault during college, and many students report experiencing coercion or manipulation with dating in relationships. Journalist and podcast host Hunter Gilmore is on a mission to bring greater awareness to these realities through her platform, Hunting for Answers. Today's guest is journalist and podcast host Hunter Gilmore, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this. Welcome, Hunter.
Thank you, Crystal, for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Like I said, we are, celebrating National Women's History Month. But in that celebration, I think it's also really important and key for us to also have these type of conversations to educate women and just, the public, specifically our community, about some issues that we continue to struggle with, even though it feels like a lot of progress has been made. I remember back in my college days years ago, this, women's safety on campus was an issue. And it's crazy to me to hear that even though a lot of things have been talked about, we still have a long way to go when it comes to this topic. Can you talk a little bit about what you found out through your research when it comes to, young women on college campuses?
Yes. As you mentioned, it is a huge area that many students and campuses nationwide have really found themselves vulnerable in. And a lot of people are surprised when they realize these realities. And so as we've found out, 1 in 5 women and 1 in 16 men will experience sexual assault during their time on campus. And so just making sure that we are creating these environments and having these open conversations so that women, men, just our young people can feel comfortable and empowered to really protect themselves and navigate these situations safely.
Mm-hmm. I wonder what is, I know that in these situations, there's always a lot of misconceptions, right? I will just tell you, I remember hearing when I was growing up, like, if you put yourself in certain situations, then that's your fault, right? A lot of times victims are blamed for situations that happen to them because they, whether they were at the wrong place, hanging out with the wrong people. And I think a lot of those stereotypes and just narratives are really damaging and take some of the danger away from what is really happening and take some of the seriousness and the depth away. What do you think the biggest misconceptions are now about some of these situations, specifically when it comes to young people on college campuses?
Yes, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that it's simply not happening, and that college campuses, when we think about safety on college campuses, we think, they have the public safety department and officers on campus. Some campuses are gated, some are not. But overall, we think that campuses are safe. But in reality, students, they have on-campus life and they have off-campus life. And so navigating those dynamics and making sure that there's no gaps left in between when students are, engaging in activities off campus.
Yeah, that's a good point, because like you said, when a parent sends their child to college, they're thinking of them being on college, but on the campus, but you have a lot of freedom, that you did not have, if you lived at home prior to that. So I know you have established Hunting for Answers to kind of draw some attention to this, dispel some myths, and provide just resources and possibly solutions for some of these situations. What are some of the biggest things that you've learned since starting Hunting for Answers about the safety on campuses, and maybe even the way that young women and young men are looking at the safety themselves?
Yeah. one of the biggest things I learned is that a lot of young people aren't having the right conversations, and they're not really speaking about these things. In one of the sessions, an expert had asked something to the effect of, have you, like, when you were growing up, did your parents teach you or have conversations about how to healthily date, and conversations like that? And when I tell you, not a single hand in the class went up. No one was able to say that they grew up having these open conversations with their parents. And so it was really eye-opening and really shocking, and kind of drew the whole point that, wow, this is really an area that a lot of students aren't talking about.
Mhm.
And I know particularly in another session, a student, it was actually a male student, had asked, how do you hold those accountable who you love? And students are really becoming engaged in the conversations, and they want to have these. They want to know, what other peers are going through, and how to, just navigate and learn different tools and things of that nature.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I'm thinking back to like conversations I had with my daughter, and I'm wondering what would your advice, let's start with parents or, mentors, family members, what advice would you give them on how to start these conversations, on how to be in a healthy dating situation? Like, I think for a lot of us, it's like what, that we assume that certain signs should be obvious, but when you're in these situations, those signs are not always, as obvious. So what advice would you give to people that are trying to help prepare a young person who's on the way to college in the next, year or so?
Yeah, I think my biggest advice, and it's something that my mom did with me, is that she talked a lot about her experiences in college. And I know sometimes parents, they might not want to, and it might be like skeletons in the closet type of thing. But I think that it could be really helpful to kind of create that dynamic with your children, where it's like you're not on this pedestal. It's like, okay, my parents really went through this. It's something that they can relate to, because they forget that you were once their age too, And so I think kind of drawing that open environment could be really impactful. And then two, making sure that, you had mentioned a good point. Sometimes as parents, you might think that these things are obvious, and adults have gone through things, and younger teens just now entering the dating world, they haven't experienced it. So I think also holding space for them to learn
Mhm.
and grow, and just let them know, like, it's not their fault, certain things. It's just a matter of learning and taking different experiences in life, in my opinion.
Yeah. There's a word that, we mentioned in the statistics that I was reading, which was coercion. And I know that can be, it's kind of like a slippery slope. You said just a minute ago that a lot of people don't know how to hold someone accountable that they love or they have feelings for. And so I would love for you just to kind of give a little bit more clarity about that, because I know that a lot of young women don't realize when boundaries are being crossed. Sometimes they don't realize that this is a problem. This is something that they don't deserve, something that they did not, create themselves. And I mean, same is for young men as well. But that idea of the difference between being coerced into doing something, as opposed to making a decision that did not involve coercion. How do we know the difference between, how should young people know the difference between something that they've decided to do and something that they have been coerced into doing outside of their will?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing is for young people to trust their gut and their intuition, especially in these situations. Um, Because when it comes to coercion, it can be dressed up as many different things. And so if something seems off or something, if you've made your point and you stated you don't want to do something, and someone is just continuously, even if they keep asking you, and things like that, that could be a form of coercion if you've already said, you don't want to do something. So I think that making sure you're just, not backing down from your non-negotiables and staying true to following your intuition.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I think that's extremely important to teach young people, because I know a lot of women, a lot of young women I've had conversations with will say if someone kept asking them, they felt like they didn't have a choice, right? I like
Right.
this person. I didn't feel like, and they made a choice to do something, but it really wasn't, it was outside of their will. Tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about like how these, I know you do you tour campuses and have conversations. Can you tell us a little bit about what you experience, with hunting for answers when you go to colleges? We know you're going to be here in Atlanta at Agnes Scott next week, but talk a little bit about what that looks like, and what you hope to leave with students that you encounter in those at those events.
Yes. So, as you mentioned, we'll be at Agnes Scott College next week, and I'm super excited. Therapist Adelia Scott will be joining me once again, and she was super phenomenal. The whole idea of this was to kind of bridge the gap so students and experts and advocates in the space can really just have a chance to like connect with each other. And so the biggest thing that I've found is students, they're really asking questions that they want to know, whether it's, for themselves or someone who they really care about. And
Mhm.
so having a resource in real time, and seeing the students be engaged and, really just taking the information, because one of the main kind of talking points in the program is relational awareness. And when I ask, I always start each session with, who's even heard of relational awareness? And when I tell you most students have not, in one class, one person raised their hand, but a lot of students haven't heard this. And so I'm really excited to bring knowledge to young people about how it's important to stay safe in dating situations, but it's also important to know how we navigate just these encounters that we have with everyday people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Plus, I think that there's not often enough emphasis placed on the fact that, like we said, young men also experience this. Do you think there's a different set of maybe things to look for, or even how do we make young men feel comfortable sharing things if they've been in those situations? Because often uh, men are taught to repress their emotions in a little bit different way than women are. So, what advice would you have for those with a young man going to college that also may want to make sure that they've prepared him, or that he feels comfortable and has a safe space to share if something did happen or has happened to him?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of time men do get overlooked in this whole conversation. I think that it's really important to, again, make sure that we are holding the space and letting the men in our lives know that, it's okay to break down the stereotypes that, men don't have emotions and men can't cry and things like that. It's
Mhm.
important to show them that, it's okay to be able to express yourself and really encourage them. So yeah, that would be my best advice.
Hmm. Well, I do want to ask you before we ask you again to repeat and let people know how they can get involved and learn more about hunting for answers. Can you give maybe some just some tips from your own personal experience, or what you've seen on how young people can establish relational awareness? Because the fact that that's not something that people really think about, but most people are looking to be in relationships where, we're definitely get to college, and it is probably one of the first times that you can have a relationship outside of being having your parents input, right, or having a older person's guidance. Is totally on you. How can young people establish and understand that it's important to establish relational awareness?
Yes. So I think it's important for young people to establish relational awareness just by realizing that it's important to be aware and aware of your surroundings. And I think a lot of what we've seen just in the news and everything, it's a lot of things going on, and so making sure that we're paying attention to people that if we get a weird vibe or anything like that, making sure that we're taking note of that. When it comes to the dating space and online awareness, that's a big thing because I interviewed the founders of the Black and Missing Foundation, and that was one of the things they said. Another thing that's really being overlooked right now is safety online too. So making sure that we really are vetting people, checking backgrounds, and making sure we know who we're dealing with before we're bringing people into our real lives. And then also just making sure, again, that we are staying engaged and aware in our communities.
Mm-hmm. Very good advice. Well, like I said, let people know if they're interested in finding out more about Hunting for Answers, if they are someone that has a relationship with a young person, or if it's a young person out there that wants to learn more themselves. How can they find out? Where can they find Hunting for Answers, and where can they find out more about what you're doing?
Yes, so you can follow Hunting for Answers on the Black Effect Podcast Network, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can also find us on social media. We are on Instagram and TikTok at Hunting4Answers.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank you. First of all, it's inspirational to see a young woman that is being an advocate for other young people in this space. I don't think I've ever talked to someone that this was what their mission was. And so we are really excited to be able to support you, and just want to again congratulate you for doing this work. It's really important, and I know you're making a big difference.
Thank you so much, Crystal. And thank you for bringing me on. It's been such an honor, and this has been such a wonderful conversation to have with you.
Thank you. Well, last thing I want to do is wish you a very happy National Women's History Month. And I definitely look forward to seeing you next week here at Agnes Scott.
Thank you. And happy National Women's History Month to you as well.
Thank you. All right. Have a good day. Thank you so much.
You too. Thank you.
All right, Lenox and Parker, very important conversation. And I love the fact that we had this during National Women's History Month. But remember, this conversation is not just about the month of March. This is something that we should be talking about all year long with young people and everyone. Really, I think relational awareness is important for all of us. But specifically, I know as a mother myself that had a daughter go to college and a son go to college, it's something that we can do as parents and as caregivers, as mentors, to make sure that we are encouraging our young people to be as safe as possible. This has been a cultural conversation with Crystal Jordan here on Lenox and Parker. Thank you all for staying tuned, and you can research the site lenoxandparker.com to find out more about next week's event with Hunter and Hunting for Answers. All right, thank you so much. We'll see you soon.